This was intended to be the video showing you the installation and also the announcement that the upgrade kit for the RadRover is available. Unfortunately, I did run into one little problem, so we're going to run through the installation. I'll show you the thing that didn't work, and there is a fix coming for it, and as soon as that's resolved, these will be available. This is a massive 35 amp controller designed to be plug and play for the RadRover. Bolton e-bikes. If you want an electric bike that's better, then ride along with me and my channel. Now before we jump into the installation of this screen and the 35 amp controller, why would you want to do this? Well, the stock bike is limited to 22 amps, that's the maximum output from the controller, with a 48 volt battery, which gives you about 750 watts. Now I talked about in the previous video how the motor that's used on the RadRover is only a 500 watt motor, but it does have a 750 watt label. Now I only pointed that out just to show that there are different versions of the Bafang motor. Some are stronger than others, and I certainly believe that you'll get better performance out of a 750 watt motor at 750 watts than a slightly smaller motor pushing 750 watts. Now that being said, to go a little bit quicker on this bike, you don't have to change the motor. I'm going to do further tests on that in another video, but for the sake of time, we're going to keep this one short and explain what the controller and the LCD alone can do. So at 35 amps with the stock 48 volt battery, if you turn the screen to maximum power, and that is adjustable, so you don't have to do this, but in theory the maximum power would be just shy of 1700 watts. So we're more than doubling the total available power, but we're not really increasing the top speed. You only get so many revolutions per volt out of a given motor. So because we're still using a 48 volt battery and we're using the same motor, our top speed is not going to increase, except for the fact that you can change the programming on this screen to remove any speed limits. The maximum that the screen is capable of is much more than the bike will ever be capable of. Now the second thing is strictly programming. With the KT-LCD3, everything can be programmed from the screen. You don't need a computer or an extra port or anything at all to program the controller that we've now installed on the bike. So if you want to change the power settings, and like I said, you could tune the maximum down, which would extend your range. You can change the pedal assist sensitivity. You can add a cruise control function. There's a lot of little tweaks you can do, and once again, there's a separate video I've posted all about programming this particular screen and everything you could ever want to know. And third, it gives you some options for power upgrades in the future. This controller can easily handle a 52 volt battery that would increase your top speed as well as the total wattage available. So for now, we've got the controller and the screen mounted. In a future video, we're going to install a bigger motor as well as a bigger battery and compare all three configurations so you know exactly what you can get from each one. It's going to be a pretty simple install to get this on the bike and add some power, but if you have any questions, feel free to leave one in the comments. But the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and remove the stock controller and get it unplugged from the bike. Now because this is a pretty easy upgrade, I don't need to show you everything step by step, but first thing you're going to want to do is unlock and remove your battery. That'll make it easier to get to the screws. I've already removed the strap on the very bottom of the controller, but basically you're going to pull these 4 Phillips screws out, and then that will get the controller loose. If by chance you don't have a screwdriver that can get into either of these and around the battery cradle, you can remove the 3 bolts for the battery cradle, but that may not be necessary. Now that we have the controller loose, we're going to follow the cables down to the bottom of the bike and unplug it. We're right underneath the bike so you can see. This cable goes to the battery, this one goes to the pedal assist, and this bigger one over here is going back to the motor. So all you need to do is give them a tug and unplug. Same for the pedal assist. And we also have a cable going to the wiring harness. This leads to everything by the handlebars, and it's actually going to stay in place. So we're just going to disconnect that one here. Give it a nice firm tug and wiggle back and forth. You're going to have one zip tie on the frame holding your motor cable in here. So clip that off, make sure not to nick your cable, and then you're going to disconnect your motor cable. Now the old controller is loose. You can go ahead and feed all those cables out and remove it from the bike. So here's our old 22 amp maximum current controller, and here's our new 35 amp controller. They're actually about the same thickness, but the 35 amp controller is about twice as wide. So you won't have any trouble fitting it on the frame right where the original controller was. First we're going to get it roughly positioned. You want to feed the cables down through the frame just like the stock controller. Now at this point there's a couple different ways to mount it. You could use a couple of heavy duty zip ties at the top and the bottom and go through these mounting holes here. If you're going to do that, I would recommend using some industrial strength Velcro behind the controller. That will keep it from wiggling side to side or up and down. I would, however, recommend a more permanent installation, and if you have the tools, put nutserts into the frame. I did a separate video on that, and I'll put a link up in the corner over here somewhere or in the description so you can see how that's done if you want to go that route. And here's the top nutsert that I mentioned that I've already put in. So I'm going to go ahead and take a bolt and just stick that in right there. And then I have a second one to go in the bottom. A little tight on space, so I'm using a smaller Allen wrench instead of the normal T-handle. And that should do it. The controller is securely mounted and it's not going anywhere. At this point you can go ahead and reconnect your motor cable. Now pay attention, there is a small arrow on the connector on both sides so you can line those up. Sometimes, however, I've seen that they don't always line up exactly. So just be aware that's a common problem I've seen on Bafang motors and controllers, that the arrows don't always line up perfectly straight. You can take a look inside at the pins and kind of get an idea of which direction it should be facing. It's usually close, but as you can see, this one is off by about 1/8 of a turn. New motor connectors can also be rather stiff, so don't be surprised if it's rather hard to get this in. Now right here you can see two little ridges. The end of this connector should be in between those when this is fully seated. So make sure to push hard and get it all the way in. And once the motor cable is connected, you're going to want to go ahead and put the zip tie back in place, pulling the cable up to the frame right here. And now we can start reconnecting the other cables to the controller. Our yellow pedal assist connector can run over to the controller and plug in. I'm going to have to interrupt right here. The pedal assist, unfortunately, is the thing that didn't work. It was supposed to be configured from the manufacturer on the controller to work with the stock pedal assist, and I've run into a problem. And with the Chinese New Year going on right now, it's going to be a couple of weeks before I have a permanent fix. So once that's resolved, I'll send out an update and I'll put the controllers online. Now in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and continue with the upgrade, get everything else installed, because the rest of it will remain the same. Our battery connector can also run over to the controller. And finally the connection for the wiring harness that runs up to the screen, the brakes, and the throttle. And finally make sure that these wires are tucked up nice and tight. Use some zip ties if you need to make sure they're not going to get caught in anything on the trail. Now we're not done quite yet because the stock King meter is not compatible with the new aftermarket display, so we need to put on either the KT LCD3, which is this one, or the KT LCD-H, which is a new color display. Now the color display isn't quite in stock yet, it will be soon, so if you're in a hurry, this is going to be the first available option with the color display coming shortly after. I'll go ahead and loosen up the bolts on the mounting bracket and remove the display from the bike. And you also have this one connection right here. You'll need to untwist this connector, unscrew that, and just unplug it. And of course we'll also need to remove the buttons from the left side. And we're not going to remove the brake levers or the grips or anything to get this done. We're going to just get all of these loose and then very carefully pop them off of the handlebars. For the KT LCD3, the pedal assist is on the left, so this is the proper orientation of the screen. Here's your mounting bracket, which is held on underneath by 2 Phillips screws. The mounting bracket can go either direction. Personally, I prefer to put it this direction only because then you don't see these nuts and bolts while you're riding. It just looks a little bit cleaner from the seated position. So I'll put the 2 Phillips head screws into the LCD and the mount. And next we're going to loosen up these 2 screws so we can slip the mount over the handlebars. Now be aware that you have a nut on the top. Make sure that you don't lose that when you're loosening these 2 screws. And to make sure I don't lose those 2 nuts, I like to put my fingers over the top and carefully slip this bracket on. So once again, my fingers are holding those 2 nuts in place. Now I can put those 2 screws in from underneath. And I'm also going to do the same for the switch. I'm going to loosen this little bolt right here, or screw, and pop this onto the handlebar right here. And it's got the power button, so you can see which direction it's facing, or if it's easier to tell from here, just make sure that you have the cable towards the front of the bike. And make sure to be very gentle with this so that you don't snap the plastic. So we can tighten our buttons down. And the last step is to connect our new screen back to the cable on the stock wiring harness. Now you can go ahead and put your battery back on and lock it in place. And with your battery switch turned on, hold the power button down in the middle for just a few seconds, and your new screen should come on. Now I've already put out a very detailed video on programming the KT LCD3 as well as the LCD-8H, which is the color version. So I'll make sure to put a link to that in the description. So if you need the detailed settings and configurations, you can find those. But for this video, as far as installing the parts and pieces, we've put on our 35 amp controller and our new LCD, and now we have a lot more power on the bike. Thanks again for watching another video. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit that little bell so you get notifications when new videos come out. Now that I've got that kit installed on the RadRover, in the next video I'm going to give you some performance numbers.